afternoon, Dr. Randy. How are you today?
I'm good. And how are you?
I'm well. I'm well. We have an interesting topic today. Fighting patterns get established early in a relationship. Um,
Well, the topic is really, yes, it's about fighting patterns, sadly, the ones that don't do any good and don't ever get resolved. Yes. And then one in particular that I find to be one of the most painful and most destructive of relationships. But let me just say, let me start out with relationships have two capacities. They can grow and transform, get bigger, deeper, more beautiful, and they can scar. All relationships scar. People have fights. They fight. They don't get along. Things happen in their life that they didn't predict. Crises, things like that. So relationships scar. You can't stop them from happening. So you
mhm,
have four possible outcomes. You have relationships that scar and grow. They're very exciting. They're always growing and they're always scarring. People are always fighting, but they're always getting better. And they're filled with a lot of drama and joy and happiness and sadness. But you somehow don't feel bad for the people because they take every difficult situation, they make it better later. Then relationships can grow but not scar. Those are the most beautiful. They're growing all the time and not scarring as often, so they don't have to be held down by those scars. Because remember, scars in the body are inert. They don't take in nutrients, they don't give out waste products, so they just hang there. But they take up energy in the body. They do the same in the psychological body. So you can also be people who scar all the time and don't grow, and those relationships usually end relatively rapidly. And then there are the very polite, pleasant relationships that never scar and never grow, but it's hard to sit with those people because it's so boring. You just never do anything, and you just want to scratch their heads or bump them a little bit or something. But if they're content, okay, that's all right.
right.
But fighting patterns are usually established very early in a relationship. They come from childhood experiences of the way you saw your parents fight. They come from media, very, very prolific media showing people fighting. They come from all kinds of things. They usually have to do with attack and defensiveness, or people will stonewall, or they'll, they will find fault with the other person and the other person tries to talk them out of it in some way. Or, they will air disappointments and disillusionments over and over and over again. They usually have a certain time to them. If children see their parents start to fight, they'll say, "Oh, we better go back in the house. This is the 20-minute fight. They're never going to go anywhere." I mean, people on the outside begin to see and observe other people's fighting patterns. But the sadness is a fighting pattern that is not subject to witnessing, to transformation, to change. It's like I often tell this story that when I was a kid, my father was from England, and so we played darts at home, but we didn't have money to do other things. We played darts. We had a big dartboard, but the dartboard was sitting on a wall. And my brother and I weren't very good at it. So we would keep throwing darts and they would miss and hit the wall, So it was fine. There were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of holes in the wall. But one day I threw the dart at the wall and the whole entire wall came down. It was the final dart. It was the final hole in the wall. That happens
It is a true story.
That's true, and that happens to relationships as well. People will throw these darts and throw these darts and throw these darts, and then one day, all of a sudden, you can't come back. So I tell people, unproductive fighting is really bad for a relationship. You may not notice the scarring, but if you're not growing beyond that scarring, like I said a few minutes ago, that dart board wall is going to come down. So I want to talk about one particular kind of fighting that is very kind of dramatic. It feels very young, sort of like on the schoolyard. It produces certain outcomes. And over a period of time, if people continue to fight this way, I can pretty well predict their relationship will end. There just is not enough growing to go beyond these kind of ruthless, mean-spirited kinds of behaviors. So they are called, what I call threats that have no basis. Where people will threaten something dramatically and extremely, but never follow through on, ever. And those threats can be things like, I never want to see you again. Don't you ever talk to me that way. I'm out of here. often characterized by, ever, always, never, whatever, like a kid would say. I'm never going to talk to you again. But then that they're only talking from one part of them, and talking from one part of them, another part may emerge later that says, well, wait a minute, I didn't really mean that in some way. I'm so done with you. I don't care if I ever see your face again. I'm never going to love you again. I'm never going to open my heart. Ever, ever, ever. I can't, I'll never forgive you for this. You'll always be stupid those kinds of wipe out threats. And then the person comes back the next day, very often a fight, and is very nice, like that never happened. But these hurling threats, these that never happen, are one of the most dangerous kinds of fight behaviors that you could ever watch or experience. And over time, they develop a life of their own. All of a sudden, they become the way people fight, and they go from 0 to 60 very quickly. They drop down to below the belt very quickly. People don't care what they're saying, don't even experience what the other person is hearing. They become almost just a multitude of misery. I can't even express them to you. But when I see them in my office, I stop people immediately. You may never, and I underline the word never, use never, always, or ever again in an argument unless you want to be perceived as under the age of 10. So, as I said, this cumulative effect of these are like that dartboard wall. And let me tell you what happens. These are the kind of what I would call the 8 most common outcomes of using that kind of that strategy or that kind of behavior in fights. So the first one, which would be the most obvious, I would think to anybody, would be there's a loss of credibility. Over a long, long period of time, when you keep hurling these empty threats and not following through on them, the partner begins to not take you very seriously anymore. They become sort of immune, sort of inoculated. They're inoculated, they've gotten too many vaccinations. And after a while, the darkness just doesn't penetrate. They don't take you very seriously. They sort of just sit there until you're done. But they'll say, I'll vomit it out. It really doesn't matter because I know you don't mean it in any way, shape, or form. And the loss of credibility is really, really hard to regain. When people don't believe you anymore, it's like the boy who called wolf. They don't believe you anymore than when you really mean something. That person is very unlikely to take you seriously. Right? So that loss of credibility is extremely hard to regain. And if a person isn't thinking or is feeling very young and throws it out, they don't even realize that their partner is no longer feeling threatened at all. They don't even, as I said, take them seriously. They don't react to it very much, or they'll walk away or something like that. But a loss of credibility anywhere in the world is essentially the loss of people having trust that you will follow through on what you say or do. And when people have lost trust in you like that, that spreads out to trust in you in any area in life. So the loss of credibility would be the first. And most people would understand that losing credibility anywhere in your life is never a good thing to happen. If you're a little child, you can do that. I hate you. I know how to eat your peas. It's okay. I still love you, because you know that that's only a portion of who they are in that moment. They're not getting what they want. And so you don't take them seriously, but you take them seriously. You respond to them in a supportive way, but you understand that that's only a portion of them. But when people only put out a portion of them that's vicious and expect you to remember in the moment, there's a whole bunch more of them that's worth being connected to. It doesn't work over time. You lose your credibility. So the second possible outcome that can happen from these threats, these non-follow through threats, they sometimes backfire. Over time, a person is saying, well, maybe they really do mean it. Maybe they said it 160 times. By the 161st time, maybe I better take them really seriously. Maybe they in fact do. Maybe they in fact do mean it. So they start saying to you, well, why don't you just show me? Just follow through. Just follow through. Show me that you're going to do that. And when they don't, the person finally says at some point in time, you know something? If you're not going to follow through, I am, because I'm sick and tired of having these threats hurled at me. So maybe I'm tired of you forever. Maybe I'm just going to get out of it. So they can sometimes backfire. The person will get to the point where they're just not going to put up with them anymore. And they take them seriously on purpose to give them the excuse to leave the relationship, even though that person doesn't mean them seriously. They will hold them accountable in order to give themselves the excuse to get out because they want to get out anyway. So they can backfire. That's not a good thing. They may say something like, I know you're not going to ever follow through, but you know something? I don't care anymore. I'm following through. And now the person gets petrified, terrified. No, I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it. I really love you, but it's too late. They're just done. So that would be another possible outcome of using these empty threats. So let's look at another one. They can cause counter empty threats. When you threaten people a lot, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this if you do that, I'm going to do this if you do that, I don't want you anymore, I'm done, I'm through. Pretty soon the other person can start using, especially if they saw this growing up, say, well, I don't like you either. And I'm not sure I'm ever going to stick with you if you keep talking to me that way. Well, maybe I don't like you anymore either. Maybe the next person that leaves this relationship is me, but I mean it. You know, they start throwing it back and forth. And when you watch these kind of people hurling these empty threats at each other, you better believe it. Those are eventually going to become real. They're not going to stay empty because what you're doing is you're creating a larger amplitude. There's more drama. There's more. It just gets meaner and meaner and meaner and meaner. And over time, that escalation makes people more and more farther away from each other. It's harder to come back when both people are hurling threats at one another and the drama increases and there's hands thrown up in the air and yelling from the other side of the room. And, you know, people begin to get to the point where they can't recover anymore. So those countering more empty threats, pretty soon that people are just never listening, never trying to repair anything, never trying to go beyond them, never doing anything beyond those empty threats. And over time, there's just no recouping. The fourth would be, and you know, we're seeing a lot of this in the media now. I know that psychology has had it sort of like children, you know, men are from Mars, and then everybody's married to a narcissist, and then everybody's in some kind of attachment disorder, or there's an inner child. I mean, we go through these periods of time where that focus is very intense, and then it moves into something else. But where we're going now, and I talk about this in many of my podcasts because it's so powerful, is we have so long ignored trauma in childhood and how traumatic childhoods shape and define relationships that people grow up if they have not dealt with their trauma. So when people are hurling threats, as I said, they're usually very young. They're usually, and they can activate youngness in their partner. And all of a sudden they're taking each other seriously, but at a very different level. They're regressing. You know, it's like as I said, it's like playroom taunts or the play yard taunts. I hate you. I'm never going to be your friend. But all of a sudden, because the trauma comes up, maybe they had a parent who talked to them that way. Maybe that's the way they saw their parents. Maybe they had a parent who left every once in a while and didn't come back for a while and then came back. But for a while, they didn't know if they were going to come back. And so the children were helpless and terrified. So all of a sudden, when somebody hurls a threat at you, it's like, oh my God, you're just like my mother. You're just like my father. You're going to leave me too. You're never going to come back. I don't have any power over you. So trauma gets activated. And trauma in one partner will activate trauma in another partner. And trauma, as I said, creates regression. You don't act like a 4-year-old, you become a 4-year-old at the time the trauma happened. And so now you have two children screaming at each other and no adults in the room. And when that happens, there's more likely to be more painful scars, more painful wounds that the adults might come together later and try to heal, but they're activating old wounds. So it's very important to understand that when you see heartbreak, when you see tears, when you see, when you see these regressive statements, I feel like a child on the other end. I feel like you're never going to ever love me again, ever in my whole life. Those kind of things. I have to get out of here. These threats. It's coming from that reimmersion of trauma. And if people don't resolve those traumas, they're going to be absolutely triggered by these empty threats, these hurled empty threats. Most like of any kind of interaction that's negative between people, threatening statements are the most likely to trigger trauma. So another possible outcome Very, very often people who hurl comments like that or fight below the belt, they have deeper feelings of powerlessness. They feel like that person's going to leave them anyway at some point in time. So they're just sort of taking charge of it by becoming the person that pushed them away. But they didn't really want to. They just never understood why they say those things or where they come from or what they're covering. And so they'll do things like raise their voices and make angry expressions or stop or walk out or flail their arms or throwing things. The drama just increases and increases and increases. And that person's almost like venting. It almost becomes, how can I describe it, like a seizure. Like a seizure. They can't stop. So once they get going, because the drama is hiding the deeper feelings that they're too scared to look at. So the more drama, the more craziness, the more insanity, the less they have to look at how terrified they are deeply inside, how fearful they are of an outcome over which they have no control.
Mhm.
So that's a very likely outcome of these empty threats as you see them become more and more and more dramatic, and then you can't find that person's pain underneath. And every time they do intensify drama, they bury the pain more deeply. So that's another possible outcome. The sixth possible outcome is when the person's hurling insults is on the other end of a person who is a harmony freak. They hate disharmony. They hate difficulties of any kind, and they move immediately into what you might call passive aggressive behavior. They agree with the person. I am really horrible. I am really terrible. I'm really sorry. I should have done it better. I was the one that. Please, it's my fault. Just please don't threaten to leave me. It really frightens me. I really love you. Don't say those things to me. That they make me terrified, and they go into this kind of behavior that's trying to just do anything to stop it by blaming themselves completely. But it's really a passive aggressive behavior. They will not change their behavior after that. It's only in the moment that they're trying to get the person to stop because they can't handle the pain of that intensified pain, that intensified hurt. Every time they're threatened, and that can overlap with trauma from childhood, of course, as all of these can overlap. But every time they get hurt, their first response is to just be as nice as they can be, as caring as they can be. Unfortunately, rather than quiet the other person down, they tend to become more intensified. And the reason being is very often a person who's hurling threats is really looking for connection and for energy from the other person. So often when I've gotten down into what drives you, it's like, well, that person pays no attention to me. They don't really care. And so when they do this and the other person gets quieter, they actually want to up the level of intensity and shared energy. And so sometimes makes them more intense. And then another person just starts to cry or kind of becomes a huddled heap and just sits there and takes it as if they're being beaten. And the other person becomes more and more frustrated and increases that level. The seventh outcome is very, very common. And people never or very rarely expect this. And I will warn them and warn them and warn them. But they're so often surprised is that family that you go to with these outrageous statements. I'm never going to be with that idiot again. I can't stand the way he or she treats me. This is really stupid. I'm going to get a divorce. They go to other people in their support network, whether it's families or friends or coworkers, or they will do these hurled threats in public where other people hear them, or in front of their children, they'll hear them. And over time, that support network, which might have ultimately said, well, why don't you get a divorce? That sounds really horrible. This must be terribly painful, whatever. They begin to back away. The pattern of these empty threats where people don't do anything but just complain and whine and vent, people around them start to not want to support them anymore. They will say things like, we've watched you for years throwing out everything you're going to do if your partner doesn't change, but you never do it. We just don't believe you anymore. You're crazy. So all of a sudden now the people they relied on that would make them feel that they were justified begin to fall away. And what does that do? Of course, it makes the person feel more lonely. It makes them feel more unsure of themselves. It makes them feel more insecure, and it increases the behavior. The last one, which is probably the saddest, is that when people have that fighting pattern of hurling empty threats, they don't look deeper inside themselves because that's what they rely on. They have a partner usually who listens and does one of these different outcomes. But instead of going deeper inside and finding out, why do I do that? Well, maybe they're frightened of intimacy. I want you this close, but not too close. I want you that far away, but not that far away. So maybe if I threaten you, you'll go a little far away. And then when I'm at night, you'll come a little farther back, but you won't be invading me because I'm scared of intimacy. And you won't leave me because I'm terrified of abandonment. So they're trying to sort of monitor that as best as they can. But they never look and say, why do I push people away at all? Why do I test them like that? Why do I even behave that way? You know, what's wrong with me? The pattern of fighting with empty threats rarely results in the person who does it really searching to try to heal what's underneath that, whether it's insecurity or terror of loss or whatever that is, and they'll just go on to relationship after relationship doing the same thing. Now, obviously, they have to have a lot of positive qualities or that person wouldn't stay with them early on in a relationship or long term. They may be very sexy, they may be very intellectually exciting, they may have, you know, wonderful hobbies, but those things pale over time. So these people will tend to go into another relationship and people will choose them for all the lovely things they do. And then when they have this same behavior fighting pattern, they will eventually be abandoned, which is what they've been pushing to do, but never really wanting that to happen. So you have to ask, are these empty threats an attempt to get a stronger reaction, even if it's negative? I once had a little 7-year-old little boy who said, I make my dad hit me because at least he touches me. That's sad, but that's accurate. When people want attention or connection, they sometimes will resort to anything just to up the ante. Or maybe it would be easier for me if that person got out of my life. Maybe I'm threatening because I want them to leave. And I can't get them to go any other way. Those would be some of the questions a person would ask if they were getting deeper. And when they want their credibility back, those are the kind of questions they would start asking themselves. So when I'm working with people, and this is really sad, and I have one person, and sometimes both, but one person who tends to threaten and threaten and threaten, and I ask them to look more deeply at themselves, they most often start with, oh, you're on the other person's side. They're so threatened by not even asking them, look, I can help you. You can get past this. You can learn to communicate in a much more joyful way and maybe make this relationship work. Very, very often they're so locked into the pattern that their first response is feeling that they're being attacked in some way. So it's difficult, but if I can get them past that and I can get them to feel safe with me, I have been able to turn this around multiple times.
Really? Wow. And you mentioned something that they were young and this happened, and can that be undone, like you said, as you help them?
Well, you know, when trauma is being triggered, you have to go back to the original trauma and try to heal that trauma because it's bleeding into all their relationships. And if they don't know that it's bleeding into their relationship and they just think that they're only doing it currently, they can't stop because that activates that trauma. So you have to go down deeper with that person. That takes much more work. But the good news is it's really, really healable if a person wants to change his or her behavior.
Wow, that's a powerful article. And I think people will probably know somebody or, get some help from
Well, you
it.
know, the support network can really help if they challenge that person early on. But if they become sort of co-conspirators with them and listen, oh, so sorry, you should leave that person, as I said earlier, or why do you put up with this? And it can extend far beyond where it should if friends or family support the behavior, which is dangerous.
Right. All right, Dr. Andy, we'll wrap this up. That's a great article. And we'll see you next week. And where can they find you in case they need more information?
They can get me on my website, which is randygunther@cox.net. All one word, lowercase, Randy with an I. Or, you can also get on my YouTube channel, Randy Gunther YouTube, and listen to all the other podcasts I've done. That would be lovely. You can also suggest topics. I'm very, very happy to talk about something that's very important to somebody. Anytime.
Great. Okay, Dr. Annie, we'll see you next week, and thank you.
Sounds wonderful. I'll see you then, Ryan.
Okay.
Bye-bye.